Thanks.
He's also professionally, he's a high school teacher of maths and science. So Stanley migrated to Australia 11 years ago from China to pursue a childhood dream of becoming a scientist and making discoveries in the natural world. He somewhat realised that dream through a series of university studies, including a master's degree in zoology with a research component on the foraging behaviour of peaceful doves, and a PhD in conservation genetics on the black-throated finch at James Cook University at Townsville. That's what Stanley will be talking about tonight. Towards the end of his PhD, though, he realised that the academic world wasn't for him, and he decided to pursue another passion, which was teaching. After completing another master's degree in secondary teaching, he's now working full-time as a maths and science teacher in a Steiner school in Sydney. So the title of Stanley's talk is The Tiny Finch and the Mega Mind, My Story with the Black-throated Finch. And I'm sure people are aware of the story of the black-throated finch in the Adani mine and how it was voted Australia's favourite bird or whatever it was last year. So the black-throated finch has got an amazing profile, and that's thanks in no small part to the work that Stanley did on that bird. So I'll hand it over to him now.
All right. Thanks, Mick, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Just to make sure, can everyone hear me all right? Beautiful. All right. So I'm going to just quickly share my screen. That one there. Okay. Can everyone all see my screen? Beautiful. So let me just make sure my computer all working properly. There we go. Okay. Some of you guys probably have already seen this picture that I've taken literally right on the edge of Adani coal mine back in 2013 when I first went there. I think the BirdLife Australia magazine used this as a cover photo. I think was earlier this year, I can't remember exactly. But yeah, so I was quite excited to getting a little bit more sort of profile for this bird in the general world. So getting more people to know about this little bird. So I guess what I really want to talk about, oops, wrong slide. Oh yeah. So I guess I'll just start talking about me. I know Mick has already sort of told you guys about my story. It's just a couple of pictures of me over there. If you can't really see me from the little screen live. So yeah, basically I grew up in China on the western side of China, basically in the Tibetan region. When I was a kid, I sort of grew up in this really, really beautiful remote mountain village surrounded by you know, really beautiful forests, rivers, and lived in the sort of houses that are made of mud and straw. So it was my parents, when I was young, I was really, really poor. So, you know, I still remember I used to go out with my brother. We used to pick up the cow shit for fuel because we simply couldn't afford buying any like coal or anything like that. So we got to flip the cow shit and then making sure both sides are dry, and then we pick them back up and then burn them for cooking, or even in winter it was really, really cold and we put it underneath of the bed. So we'd have really, really warm bed as well. So because of that sort of closeness to nature, that kind of just made me fell in love with all these animals around the world. I mean, not just in China, but also, you know, every single country that I saw through, you know, all the documentaries on TV. In particular, I fell in love with all the animals in Australia. Ever since I was a kid, I always had this dream of coming to Australia and, you know, touching, you know, catching birds or just looking at koalas and wallabies and platypus, all this amazing and bizarre animals in Australia. I always wanted to just come here and to study them. So that's kind of my motivation of coming to Australia. So 11 years ago, when I was just turning 20, I thought, okay, you know what, I'm gonna actually come to Australia. So I applied for my master's degree at James Cook University in zoology, and then I got in. So And that's what made me, come to Australia. And then I was like pretty much one step further towards realizing my dream of working with the amazing Australian animals. So from there, basically, I was working mostly with all animals in Australia, not just birds. Sort of my speciality in birds started when I started doing my PhD. I was actually offered the opportunity to work with Black-throated Finch research at that time. And before that, I didn't really know about this bird. So I spent a lot of time at the first couple of years of my PhD research simply just going out and trying to find the bird. It literally took me about 1.5 years to actually see Black-throated Finch in real life. So it was a big struggle in terms of getting enough data for my actual genetic research later on. But for today's talk, there are basically about 4 key components I want to talk about. I guess the very beginning is more sort of a background information. I want to look at grandivorous birds in general, and then I want to lead on to the Black-throated Finch, a little bit information about the bird, ecology, and also the distribution, the conservation status, etc. And then I want to look at the Adani project and how it is linked with the Black-throated Finch. And then eventually I will spend a little bit of time talking about my research. It could potentially get a little bit technical, but I'll try my best, try to put it in the simplest words so everyone can understand. All right, so the grandivorous birds we know are the birds that actually eat seeds. So there's a whole group of them, including finches, parrot, a lot of the grass finches, pigeons and doves. And we know grandivorous birds in Australia are actually in decline, and it is not new to us. It's been declining for many, many years. This is a little graph basically showing out of all the declining birds in Australia, and you can see the grandivorous birds takes more than 1/4 of all the declining species. It's quite a big component of birds that are threatened. Out of these, and we know the grandivorous birds in Northern Australia are even more threatened than grandivorous birds in other parts of Australia. Some of the really classic examples, we've got a Black-throated Finch, the Pictorana manakins, and also the white-bellied form of the crimson finch from Cape York, golden-shouldered parrots, starfinch, diamond firetails, Gouldian finches, and also the partridge pigeon. I'm sure most of you guys who have been birding around Australia would have seen at least a few of these species. They're quite magnificent to see in the wild, especially when they come in massive flocks. So in terms of the reasons why grandivorous birds are in decline, we're still, a lot of people are studying, trying to figure out exactly why they're declining. But generally speaking, we know 3 key reasons why they're declining. First of all is that sort of intensive grazing. A lot of the lands, particularly in the dry areas, been trees and forests being cut down. So they can be used for grazing purposes. The intensive grazing essentially taken out all the sort of habitats for finches, particularly the grasslands being grazed out by cattle. Another key reason is the invasive plants and weeds, and this is probably one of the key reasons why birds like Black-throated Finch has been declining, because a lot of finches, particularly ground-eating birds, they tend to prefer lands with a lot of sort of open grounds. But when land is being invaded by plants and weeds, there tend to be massive overgrowth on the ground cover. So it's basically, it'll be no open patches on the land. So a lot of the ground-eating birds simply fly off, or they simply can't find any sort of places to eat. As a result, they are declining. And another reason is, as we're seeing nowadays with the climate change and also the big bushfire that we had towards the end of last year, the changes in fire frequency and intensity. The result of that is pretty much direct fatality of a lot of the endangered species. Simply finches, little birds like black-throated finches, they can't simply escape when the fires are sort of, coming up so quickly. They simply get burnt and die. Massive populations get wiped out by really intense bushfires. So those are the three sort of key reasons we nowadays understand why the granulous birds are declining. In terms of the black-throated finch, just quickly a show of hands, how many of you guys have actually seen them in the wild? 1, 2, 3, not a lot. How many of you guys have actually seen the white runt, the southern subspecies, the endangered ones? No? Okay, cool. So I've got 2 pictures over here. As you can see at the top one, that's the common one that you can see throughout Cape York, pretty much north of Mareeba all the way to the tip of Cape York. And that's the sort of what we considered common sort of secure subspecies, the black runt. Sometimes we call them chocolates or whatever in avian culture. I can't remember the exact terminology for them, but it's Atropigialis, the subspecies. And then the southern form, which is basically south of Mareeba all the way to what used to be historically the northern part of New South Wales, that has the white rump. As you can see, the rump has some sort of white feathers around there. Yeah, so basically the southern subspecies is the one that is considered as endangered in various states and also federal level. I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys have voted last year for the Australian Bird of the Year, and black-throated finch came to the top. I know the previous years when we were voting for Australian Birds of the Year, there was like black-throated finch wasn't even mentioned, it wasn't even on the list. So it's quite surprising and also a great result, I guess. Black-throated finch managed to get to the top last year. And I particularly, I took a screenshot of the description of the black-throated finch. I just love that description of that bird. Bedecked in subtle apricot, slate and rufous hues, this bird was unknown to all but the most ardent twitcher. With Adani mines sitting at ground zero for the largest of the 2 remaining populations of the southern race, people have suddenly become aware of this exquisite little finch. I love that little blurb of this bird. Anyway, back to this bird. You can see on the screen on the right is a map showing us the historical sightings of the black-throated finch, including the northern subspecies and the southern. You can see the red line sort of cutting. It's sort of a theoretical separation between the northern and southern subspecies. The northern one's quite common, as you can see historically. The southern one's pretty much mostly sort of around Townsville and scattered throughout southern Queensland, and also range all the way down to the northern part of New South Wales. And this picture, as you can see, after 2000, the sightings of the black-throated finch have declined significantly. Even with the northern subspecies, the sightings have reduced significantly, but in particular, the southern ones, they're literally gone from the southern range of the southern subspecies. As you can see, southeast Queensland, nothing. Northern part of New South Wales, nothing, no sightings at all past 2000. And you can see majority of the sightings around Townsville and also the ones that in central Queensland, basically around Gallagher Basin, around Adani coal mine, essentially that was. Yeah, and I think was back in 2018 in New South Wales, black-throated finch, the southern subspecies, has been officially declared as extinct. So that was quite a significant day. Before that, it used to be endangered. Now it's extinct officially in New South Wales. I know still some people out there believe these birds are still hanging around and they're trying to find them in New South Wales, but I don't think there is any luck finding them at this stage. So that's pretty much the information I wanted to share with you guys about the bird itself. Now, Adani has been on the spotlight for quite a few years now. The map I've shown here sort of put Adani into perspective. You can see this whole gray strip in this picture. That's the Galilee Basin. This sort of map is kind of outdated. I'll show you a new one a bit later, but this sort of is a really good illustration of the number of coal mines sort of being planned in the Galilee Basin, and Carmichael is only one of those. Carmichael is the Adani mine. It's also called the Carmichael coal mine. So that's where Adani is, and it's kind of sort of sitting surrounded by coal mines in the entire Galilee Basin. There's also the proposed rail project that connects the Galilee Basin with the Abbott Point, and that's where the coals will be shipped actually all the way to the rest of the world. So for Adani, there has been quite a few sort of changes in terms of its original planning. Now, at the very beginning, there was, it's going to be this $16.5 billion coal mine project, and there's going to be that, they were planning to build the biggest or the largest open cut coal mine in the southern hemisphere. But now the whole project has reduced down to $2 billion, and it's only going to be the scale down to pretty much similar sizes as other coal mines that we have. In fact, it's going to be smaller than the coal mine that we have in New South Wales. I can't remember the name, in Hunter Valley, the region. And we know initially that we're trying to get funding from all sorts of banks and other financial institutes, and it's all been denied. So now it's self-funded. In terms of the government royalty deferrals and subsidies, there have been a lot of negotiations. I don't think they came to an agreement, even though the Queensland government was trying to push this negotiations, trying to push it through towards the end of last year. But I haven't heard any sort of confirmation whether that sort of royalty subsidies have come through. So at the moment, there's nothing in terms of taxpayers' money going to the mining project, which is great. But I don't think that's going to last. Eventually, they will probably get some sort of subsidies from the government, whether it's through Queensland or federal government. In terms of the coal production, again, originally they predict they wanted to produce up to about 60 million tons of coals per year. But at the moment now, there's the scaled down version to about 10 to 15 million tons. So a lot less than they were originally planned. They were also having this, ambitious rail project that connects Galilee Basin with Abbott Point that lasts for over 388 kilometers. And now again, it's sort of scaled down to only about 200 kilometers. So only half of that original length. Jobs, that was another massive thing that people were talking about. Originally, Adani planned over 10,000 jobs, promised 10,000 jobs. Now it's only down to 1,500 jobs. And that also includes direct and indirect jobs. I think if you're only looking at the ongoing direct jobs, there was a lot less than 700 or something like that. Half of that will be ongoing direct. So it's not that big, and it's not going to give that much sort of economic benefits to Australia at all. On the other hand, the environmental impacts are huge. We know Adani has been granted unlimited access to the groundwater, which is basically the Great Artesian Basin that supplies water to a lot of the towns in that region. And Adani is going to take about 4.6 billion tons of groundwater every year. And to put that into perspective, we know the small towns in central Queensland around that region, they take about 100 to 500 million tons of water every year. And Adani will take 4.6 billion. So and you can sort of see 10 times more than all the small towns combined, the amount of water they're using. It's ridiculous. In terms of wildlife, we know apart from Black-throated Finch, they also have two other vulnerable reptiles. We know the ornamental snake and also the Yanka skink. There's also plant species, surprisingly, which is the one of the cabbage palm. I think it's the waxy. Yeah, the waxy cabbage palm is also a vulnerable plant species that are found around the area. And again, because of the connection with the rail project, the shipping of the coal through the Great Barrier Reef, and they'll have a lot of direct impact on the marine ecosystems, as well as, you know, during the process of shipping coal through the Great Barrier Reef. Greenhouse gas emissions. Again, the estimate of that, there are some sort of debates between the figures that are coming out of Adani and the figures coming out of different environmental groups. So I'm not going to go into that, but we know burning the coal will contribute hugely in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah, so that's pretty much the overall picture of what we know about Adani so far. And oh yeah, so this is a more an up-to-date sort of map of the coal mines that are proposed in the Galilee Basin. You can see China Stone, I think has already been approved, just north of Adani. And then south of Adani, we have Clive Palmer's coal, the Waratah coal, which is actually a lot bigger in terms of the landmass. It stretches all the way from northern side of Adani almost to the sort of southern edge of the Galilee Basin. And then you're connected with GVK, which is the Gina Reinhardt's, you know, mining properties over there. And then south of that, it was another Alpha mine. Again, lots of mining company, like a lot of mining releases, one after another, just within the Galilee Basin. So Adani was on the spotlight. So which is good in a way that we're exposing mining companies, but also bad because we're putting all the rest of the mines under the spotlight. So people really don't talk about the rest of the mines that are being proposed to be built in that region. We're only just talking about Adani. So a lot of the other mines are sort of being slipped through the crack, and they're getting approved and people not even really talking about it. So yeah, that's just to put Adani into perspective. And there's just some pictures. I remember this, the picture on the bottom, that's their sort of headquarters of Adani. I stayed there twice. The first time was in 2013, the second time was in 2015. And you can see the sort of the land clearing and the picture on the top right. And this was caught by, I can't remember which group, but this was actually taken to court, and Adani was sued for illegal clearing without approval. And you can see the land from this picture on the bottom, and you see over the landscape. It's really beautiful sort of sparse woodlands in central Queensland, which is extremely rare. And you considering all the cattle properties surrounding them, and a lot of the forests being completely cleared out just for grazing. And Adani is sitting on the Moree Downs station, and it was actually quite well protected. And now all this forest will be cleared just for the just for the mines to be able to be built. So it was quite sad to see all those, you know, beautiful landscapes being cleared. I went there in 2013. It took me about almost a year back and forth trying to negotiate with Adani, telling them, promising that I'm just an innocent PhD student coming here to collect some samples. I'm not gonna do anything with your permits or whatever. And initially, no response at all. I sent God knows how many emails to them directly, no response at all. So towards the end, halfway through my PhD, you know what, I really need to get some data. I really need to go there. And Adani back then in 2013 was sort of getting ready to, talk about the Black-throated Finch, and they didn't want the rest of the world to know that they have the bird on their land. So their initial strategy was to say, okay, you know what, we're gonna hide it, because no one really knows that we have these birds here. So we're going to tell the world we barely see any of these birds on our lease, so we can, quickly. We don't have to develop very comprehensive management plans for the species. But obviously that one didn't work. We knew people. For me, the reason why I decided to go there was through some other ecologists who went to nearby areas. They didn't actually see the bird. They heard the calls of the bird, and they suspect that it might be in the region. And they told me about it, and I said, okay, I got to go there. I need samples from that area, because that will be really, really good, because I can't just study the populations around Townsville. It's just not enough. So towards the end, when Adani, didn't really respond for a whole year, and towards the end, I was like, you know what, I've got to put some pressure on Adani. So I CC'd the federal government, the Queensland state government, and the Black-throated Finch recovery team, and a whole bunch of really important stakeholders. And within a week, they replied, and they said, yes, you can come next week. So it was awesome. It happened so quickly. I barely had any time sort of to pack up all my gear, and then just, it was sort of just, yep, cool, everything, get all the permissions ready, just leave, and then pack my four-wheel drive, and then just grab one volunteer, and it would just took us probably a few hours to drive out that way. And the good thing about that, now I'm thinking about, is because everything was so rushed, they didn't even get me to sign a confidentiality agreement. And that was the best thing. Otherwise, nowadays, we would not know about that population of black-throated finch there at all, because I would be be taken to court if I let that out. So I didn't sign a confidentiality agreement. And I was told that I had to be accompanied by the environmental advisor on site to everywhere I go, basically, apart from the camp. Everywhere I go, I need to be accompanied by someone. And the environmental advisor said, oh yeah, the birds occasionally come here. He told me a few different watering points and said, oh yeah, possibly, it's 1 or 2 birds come, not every day. So he took me over there. The first day in the afternoon, there was nothing there, because it was just in the middle of the day, no birds around. But I said, no, you know what? This actually looks really nice. I like this waterhole, and there are trees around. I know that's sort of the preferred habitat for them anyway, according to, what I knew back then from the birds around Townsville. I said, I wanted to come back here the next morning. So he took me back there the next morning, and I was just sort of scanning the trees and looking for the birds. And all of a sudden, I just heard the black-throated finch call. The cool thing about black-throats is that, unlike other finches, tend to be, in the lower levels of the canopy, they tend to be more closer to the ground. These guys, they love to fly over the canopy really high up. So when they call, you can just hear them calling from far away. I was like, holy fuck. I literally just jumped out. I was like, I've never heard that many birds before. This is absolutely amazing. So before that day, the biggest flock I saw about these guys was no more than 15 birds in a single flock. Usually a couple, 4 or 5 here and there. But that day, when I heard that call, I was like, no way, that's just unbelievable. As soon as I turned my head around, this massive flock of finches just landed straight in front of me in that massive tree. And my lens was quite big. It was, and then the trees were so close, I couldn't take a photo of all the birds in a single frame, but I managed to sort of zoom it out and took a quite big chunk of that sort of flock that landed there. And we counted later through the photos, literally one by one. We counted between 200 and 250 birds in a single photo, and it was roughly about half of that massive flock. So that's why we estimated it's probably about 400 birds in that single flock, and that was absolutely amazing. I'll show you that photo later. But before, so this was one of those tiny little water holes near the 10-mile bore, and that's where I found that 400 birds So yeah, there's a tiny little sort of drinking place right next to the 10-mile bore. That's where we're setting up the mist nets. I don't know if you guys can see that. The nets were really, really fine. If you are involved in bird banding, you should pretty much know how it works. We kind of set up the nets sort of not completely blocking the watering entrance, but sort of half block the entrance to the drinking place. So when birds coming to drink and they get caught in the nets, we take them out. So essentially that was the process of catching them. And you can see the really beautiful white rump right there. And yeah, so that's the black-throated finches taking out of the nets. And because I was working, looking at the genetics of the birds, so we were taking the blood samples of the birds, which was really, really interesting, because for us as humans or mammals on that matter, our blood cells do not have nuclei, which means the DNA material stored in our blood is a lot less. But for birds, blood cells in birds actually have nuclei. That means they're rich in DNA. So simply a little bit of blood from birth, I can get a lot of DNA information out of that. So we're basically taking the blood out under the wing through a capillary tube, just a tiny little spot of blood. And that was quite, I guess it was a very delicate process of taking blood samples. It did take a lot of practice to make sure, you do it really quickly to minimum the harm. And then so birds usually, back then I can usually process a bird within a minute or two. And then once I take the blood out, band it, and then put a color band on, and then put it in a bag and let it rest for about a couple of minutes or so, the wound will heal pretty quickly, and then off they go. So usually a bird takes no more than 5 minutes before between I take it off the net and then release. So yeah, this is the photo. You can try to count how many birds in that photo. I've kind of cropped out a little bit, but within this photo, I remember when I was teaching statistics or introducing statistics to my year 7 maths class, I printed out this photo and got them to try to count the number of birds they can see in this photo. They got pretty close, just a little bit over 100, just within that photo. You can see a lot of them just jam-packed on that tiny little branch, especially around the middle of this photo. It was so beautiful. It was so beautiful to see. It was very, very emotional moment when I got all those birds. So straight after I came back from Adani, I was like, yeah, that's the first thing I'm going to tell the rest of the world. We found about 400 of these guys, because before that we knew the entire population of these guys around Townsville was less than 200. That was our estimate. And this was double the amount of all the known populations of blackthroats back then. So that was absolutely significant. And the good thing is, because I didn't sign a confidentiality agreement, Adani couldn't do anything about it. So I told my supervisory team, told BirdLife Australia, and then that kind of, after that, Adani decided, okay, so I guess their original strategy trying to keep it secret wouldn't work anymore. So after that, they sort of started to change their strategy. I know for a while they were trying to do is, because we have so many of these guys, we can delist this bird. We can make this bird not endangered. We can argue, because the population is so big, they're just a common species. Therefore, we don't have to do anything about it. But that obviously didn't work. So that strategy failed again, and now they have to actually comply with this whole offset process. So what they ended up doing was 2 years later, they asked me to go back to do a survey for them. So we trying to find birds, basically trying to do some surveys within the mining lease, but also in the surrounding areas. They're trying to basically say, okay, these birds can also be found outside the mining lease. Therefore, we can purchase the land outside as offset, hoping the birds can simply just move out of Adani, going to somewhere else. And that was their argument. And we did find birds outside the mining lease, but not in large numbers. And funny enough, a lot of the birds were literally sitting on the fence and they were flying in and out, in and out. But that particular area where we saw the birds flying in and out weren't actually counted in their offset map, which I'll show you a bit later. Yeah, so that was my sort of first encounter with Adani and discovering of that population of birds. And that was just another sort of photo. You can see that sort of really beautiful natural habitat, sort of the scarce bushland with sort of, you know, nice grass understory. Obviously, that was in Adani. Now it's all been cleared just so they can, you know, dig up some coal underneath. That whole area is all gone now, because at the that photo was taken in 2015. That was already sort of included in the zone where they'll be clearing soon after. That was just another video. This is a video of the finches that are coming down to one of the waterholes, drinking and bathing, just sort of the southern edge of the Adani mining lease. You can see quite a lot of them, usually accompanied by zebra finches. Double bars, not zebras. Double bars, and also plum-headed finches usually coming as well. Yeah, surprisingly, zebras don't mix flock with blackthroats. You usually see double bars with blackthroats, and also peaceful doves. Peaceful doves are usually the first signs, and then wood swallows. Surprisingly, wood swallows, wherever, particularly inland, if you're trying to look for blackthroats, look for wood swallows. And you see wood swallows circling, is, you know, 7 out of 10 times you will see finches underneath. Finches tend to use, there has been some studies done on that. Some of the ecologists were arguing that the wood swallows actually sort of looking out for the finches. They can alarm the finches for potential danger, because the wood swallows tend to be above quite high, and they can make alarm calls, and the finches just disperse. So it's quite an interesting association between finches and wood swallows. Yeah, so this is the offset map that Adani has published, has been approved last year for black-throated finch. And you can see sort of the yellow areas that supposedly the conservation area, and that's the area sort of being offset for black-throated finch specifically. The finches that we saw outside mining lease is actually on the very southern bottom of the mining lease. Obviously, that wasn't even included in the conservation area. How ironic was that? And another thing is, so this is a publication directly coming from Adani company, and they're highlighting how the conservation area is 25 times bigger than the open cut mine area and all that sort of things. But the interesting thing about majority of this conservation area are now actually under Klein Palmer's Waratah mine lease. So they simply, set it off as conservation. Now those lands being purchased by Klein Palmer to use for his mine. So essentially, they're not really conservation area. Adani obviously are not liable for making sure the land is used for finches. All they need to do is just purchase it, rehab it, so they can. So hoping the finches will simply fly over there. Whatever's going to happen to the land after, the land can be purchased by other mining companies and used for whatever other purposes. Is not Adani's problem anymore. It's someone else's problem. So yeah, and that's why many experts are arguing this offset policy is simply not sufficient at all. Yeah. That's just a little sort of, I really like this little picture I'm seeing. This is the offset area, and then the outside is Klein Palmer's coal mine, which is basically surrounds the entire conservation area. And then where do the birds actually go? They can't really fly anywhere else. apart from, I mean, without meeting, without flying into another mining lease. So yeah. Okay, so coming down to my research, I guess one of the key things what driven me to do research was we knew back then the populations of the finches were very isolated, into very forms a lot of small pockets. And the problem with small populations, many of you probably know this already. And if you grew up in a small town where there aren't many people, one of the key problems is inbreeding. It's not just it's not just with humans, but also in animals, and particularly with endangered species that live in with very small population sizes. Inbreeding is a huge problem because animals don't know any of the ethics. They don't know they shouldn't be breeding with their close relatives. So they tend to do that a lot. But if the genetic if the gene pool within a small population is very healthy, then you can inbreed as much as you want. There won't be any problems at all. But if there was any problem within that gene pool, if there was any so-called bad genes existing within that small population, when you're breeding with closely related individuals, the chance of that bad genes to be expressed in the offspring is much, much higher. That's why when that happens, there's a terminology we call it inbreeding depression. So basically that decreases the genetic health of the population. And over a long period of time, because the genetic health of the population is decreased, if there is any sort of environmental disasters or any sort of problems happening to the population, their survival capacity will be decreased. And eventually that could lead to, again, further decline, or the worst scenario, complete extinction. So my sort of questioning was that we know these guys already, the landscapes have been fragmented for a long period of time, and birds lives in isolated populations. So I guess I wanted to know, is there any sort of inbreeding depression happening? What is the genetic sort of structure among these isolated populations of the bird? So that's sort of, I've really kind of explained, as the population declines, they tend to form isolated pockets, and there are a lot of genetic consequences associated with that. And the ultimate result of that is reduced fitness and eventually decreasing the survivability of the populations. Yeah. So I guess I had like 3 key aims on my research. I wanted to know the overall genetic structure of the existing populations that we have. And I also wanted to know what are the potential impacts of the landscapes that we have nowadays, particularly with all this fragmentation happening. I wanted to see whether this sort of landscape fragmentation would have a potential impact on their genetic makeup. And also, last thing, sort of as a side project, I looked at the potential conservation values of captive birds versus the wild birds. We know black-throated finch are not as popular as Gouldian finches in aviaries, but they are very common in avian culture. A lot of people keep them as pet birds. And in fact, when I first started the project, we knew a lot of the declines of these birds back in the early when did it become illegal that people used to trap finches in the old days in Australia? And I heard stories from some of the breeders when it was still legal for them to trap, particularly with black-throated finches. They set up strategies like in their aviaries, they basically have a little line of opening on the top of the aviaries, and then they spread seeds inside, and they just literally just leave it like that. And finches would come in, they can catch like hundreds in a single day of black-throated finches. And this is a story was told to me by someone living just south of Townsville, when Ingham, yes, Ingham, when they used to trap these guys around there when they were still around Ingham, and nowadays it's all gone completely. So yeah, so they just trap hundreds of these birds and in a single week, and that's obviously the illegal trapping back though again contributed hugely to the decline of these birds as well. Okay, so some of the field methods I've kind of explained it to you guys a bit before as well. Just a couple more pictures on the right. That was the first catch, actually, the first ever time when we managed to catch black-throated finches. And it was really cool because it was the first time, and I actually caught lots of them. We caught probably there, you can see 5 of them in this net, and there was another couple in the other net. So a single first catch ever, and we caught 8 of them. But it did take us a year to manage to trap them because the nature of their behavior, they tend to fly really high up in the canopy and they rarely come down apart from eating or drinking. And yeah, it took us a few tries trying to find out the best strategy to capture these birds. But yeah, so we managed to capture quite a few of them around Townsville. Again, you can see the picture on the left. We're putting color bands on their legs so that we can identify unique, well, individual birds, very unique, like each bird has a unique color combination. We were actually giving names to the birds at the very beginning because we're only catching a few back then. We were naming them to special peoples in our lives, and you know, we're naming them after our supervisors, or naming them after our parents. But then after a few months, it was like we give up because we're catching too many of them. We didn't have enough names left to name them. But yeah, the first I think 20 or so birds all had their special names, which was very, very cool. On the bottom is kind of our my bleeding kit. We got the needles and then the special cards that can store blood samples. Just to show you guys. In terms of the sampling, it took me to some amazing places around the country. I had road trips up to Cape York, trapping birds up there. I think I was one of the first people to actually capture, because we do get a lot of bycatches in the nets. I think I managed to catch a white-backed butcherbird, which was very, very special. There weren't that many data, you know, held by ABBBS, the banding office in Canberra. So, you know, having that bird, you see them quite often, but having them in your hand is a very, very special moment. Yeah, so we caught quite a few black-throats in Cape York as well, the black-rumped species. And then in Mareeba wetlands, we originally thought the birds in the Mareeba would be sort of in the hybridization zone between the northern and southern subspecies. We were hoping to catch some birds that have the rump, the sort of mixed color, a bit black, a bit white, but we didn't get any. They're all black. So that sort of theory just went out. It wasn't really a hybridization. It was just pure northern subspecies. And then Townsville, loads of data collections around Townsville. And then Central Queensland that we got from Adani Coal Mine. So these are the 4 sort of key areas where I've collected data. On the bottom here, this is a special graph. It's called a clustering analysis. So imagine each little line represents, each line you can see, or each bar represent one individual. If they have a very similar genetic makeup, they will be grouped into the same colors. So as you can see here, the birds, so CEQ is the birds I've got from Central Queensland and Townsville, and then Far North Queensland, and then Cape York. So Far North Queensland and Cape York. Far North Queensland basically means Mareeba, and then Cape York. And you can see by doing this analysis, by sort of comparing the similarities of the genetic makeup of individual birds, I can basically group them based off that level of similarity. So you can see all the sort of Townsville birds, they're mostly blue. And then the far north Queensland and Cape York, although the northern subspecies, they're mostly, I can't even describe, the sort of orange yellowish color. And surprisingly, the central Queensland bird is sort of in between. And there has mostly closely related to Townsville birds, but also has a little bit more of the northern subspecies form in it. Which is a quite interesting result. I did a few discussions on that in the paper that published, but I'm not going to go into details of that. The key message out of that, this is, you can see a clear separation between the northern and the southern subspecies. The northern birds are very different in terms of the genetic makeup to the southern birds. That's why whether they're related to the rump colors or not, I didn't really know. I simply didn't have enough time to go into the details of the genes that are responsible for the rump color. But you can see there is a strong genetic differentiation between the northern and the southern subspecies. And then I sort of zoomed in to the birds that I was studying in Townsville. Townsville only, a very localized population. Specifically, the population surrounding the Ross River Dam. I don't know if you've been to Townsville. Ross River Dam is a massive dam that sort of supplies water to the entire Townsville region. You can see on this map over here, so that's the Ross River Dam. It's quite big open water. And I've collected birds sort of from locations around the dam. Roughly, you can see the north east region and southwest region. Again, I did a clustering analysis. The resolution, obviously, because it's so zoomed in, the resolution is a little bit lower, but you can still see a subtle separation of the birds, even within the Townsville coastal plain. The birds that are around the Ross River Dam, you can already see sort of a differentiation occurring, the genetic makeup starting to differentiate. And the result of that is because of the Ross River Dam. The big open water acted as a barrier for the birds to cross over. Birds, finches, these guys simply do not cross big open water. So when you build a dam there, the dam was only built, I think it was only 90 years or something like that. It wasn't that old, that dam. And you can see, even though with a short, within less than 100 years, and you can already see the genetic separation of the birds that live in different sides of the dam. So that was quite a significant result. And that's probably one of the reasons why I said, when we're looking at the landscape impacts on the genetic makeup, this is one of the key things that I got out of that, is that big open water. And also on the southern side of the dam, there was a lot of grazing lands, and that was again acted as a barrier. So it was some further analysis done on this map, but this is one of the key things I wanted to show you. You can see big open water can separate that sort of genetic makeup already in a very short period of time when we're talking about the time frame in terms of evolution. So that's actually very, very short period of time. Oh, I think I got a lot of comments. I didn't even see the chat message. I might just address the questions later, if that's all right. I'll come back and look at the chat messages at the end of my talk. All right, and then, okay, so that was the Townsville bird. And then remember the third thing I was looking at, I looked at the captive birds. So I asked people around the country, but mostly along the East Coast, to collect some blood samples of their birds in their aviaries, and they sent me lots of DNA samples, which was really good. I think the Hunter Valley was a finch. There's a finch club in the Hunter Valley, and they donated quite a lot of blood samples of their birds, which is really interesting. So I did the same analysis. So I've taken out, so you can see the sort of the clustering analysis on the top, where I put all the samples together, the wild birds and the captive birds, everything all together. And you can see there's a huge separation. And the ones on the right, CAP, that means all the captive birds. All the captive birds essentially significantly different from all the wild birds putting together. Now, when I put the captive birds together with all the wild birds, the differentiation between the northern and southern subspecies simply gone. So that's how significant the differences were between the captive birds and wild birds. And then I took out the captive birds and did a separate analysis. And you can see it's pretty much a mix of nothing really. There's no pattern in this clustering analysis. You can't see any sort of significant sort of differentiation or structure in this. So that basically confirms that the birds in captivity, they've been bred after generations and generations, and a lot of inbreeding, a lot of exchange, a lot of mixing, and also a lot of breeding for special mutations. That's why you see all kinds of weird colors over here. So, and we know they're very different from the wild birds. And also there's a chart, a sort of a graph on the bottom left here, and you can see I kind of looked at the genetic distance. Again, it's another way of looking at the similarities. The code here, the circled ones are all the sources from the captive birds. They kind of grouped together. And then we have, again, in the top left corner, they're all the sources from the wild birds. Again, there's a separation. It doesn't really matter which way I'm doing the analysis. There is a separation, quite significant separation between the wild and captive birds. The reason why I was doing this is because I wanted to know, if the wild birds are all gone, can we use the captive birds to do some sort of captive breeding and release them back to the wild? And this is now pretty clear. It's simply not suitable because the genetic makeup are very, very different from the wild birds. If we simply breed them in captivity, release them to the wild, not going to work. We're probably going to create a new species, or simply they won't survive the wild. Okay, so some of the key findings out of this is we know the very distinct genetic makeup, whether it's between the northern or southern subspecies, or even within the southern subspecies just around Townsville, around the Ross River Dam, or the differences between the wild and captive birds. Whatever way I was looking at, there was a very strong genetic separation. And that basically tells me, you know how I had a question, would this sort of genetic separation eventually lead to inbreeding? My analysis actually said no, there wasn't any inbreeding depression just yet. But because we can see the differentiation forming, so maybe in the future, if this sort of separation continues, then that inbreeding depression could potentially occur in the future. So it's in the process of developing into that sort of separation and potentially decrease that genetic survival in the future. This is just a couple of other photos. I had another PhD partner who was looking at the movement, the ecology side of things. So we were doing fieldwork together, and she was tracking them, radio tracking them. We did a lot of experimenting, trying to figure out the best way to attach a little radio transmitter onto a tiny little finch. I actually bought the smallest, that radio transmitter was like less than 2 grams in terms of the weight. It needs to be less than 1% of the bird weight or something like that. So it's very, very light little transmitter, and it could go for 10 days. The battery life lasts for 10 days. It was really, really cool. And we practiced with our supervisor's zebra finches in his aviary, or we went to his aviary, we caught all the zebra finches, and then we're trying to, take all the feathers on the back and trying to glue the transmitter on and trying to figure out the best way to do that. We did the practice before we went out and catch the black-throated finches and attach the radio transmitters on. So it was quite interesting work, and it worked really well actually. We were using the radios and trying to track and find where the birds flew, and it was a very interesting a few months worth of work. And trying to walk in the hot North Queensland tropical sun in the bush, trying to find this tiny little finch that has a little radio transmitter attached to it. It oh God, it was frustrating, but it was fun. On the bottom here was a photo. It was sort of like a disaster day for us when we had a lot of bycatch. We only caught like 2 black-throated finches on that day, but we caught like God knows how many peaceful doves. As you can see in that picture, they were all peaceful doves. And the funny thing about peaceful doves is they were really literally stupid. And you catch them, they come down, we put seeds on the ground, you catch them, you let them go, and you would think, yeah, they learn, they don't come back, right? They keep on coming back. We were retrapping the same birds like in a single morning. Some of the individual birds, we kept on retrapping them 3-4 times. They're literally flying back every single time after we release them. So we kept on just taking them out and let them go, and then they flew back again trying to eat the seeds. It was funny. And a few other cool finches that we looked at, double bars, the chestnut-breasted manakins was also another really interesting birds that we were sort of color banding as a sort of byproduct that we're collecting DNA samples as well. These are the peaceful doves that we were color banding as well. So it's very, very cool sort of experience, you know, having the birds really, really close up and, you know, observe their feathers, the details of them is absolutely amazing experience. Just a couple of people, you know, I wanted to say thank you. Always like to make this acknowledgement. My supervisory team, the lab that I worked at, JCU, and also the funding body, the Black-throated Finch Trust, and the Finch Club that also provided a lot of, you know, DNA samples from the captive birds. Mareeba wetlands that I've been there and stayed there for a couple of weeks just to catch some of their birds there. Macquarie Uni, where I pretty much, after I moved down to Sydney, I stayed there and finished off writing my thesis there, and a lot of volunteers and landowners. Yeah, so that's pretty much my talk. I'm gonna quickly have a look at the chat messages in our Zoom, and I'll address those questions first. And after that, if anyone has any other questions, please, I think it was a system that you put your hand up and then we'll just unmute you and you can ask questions then. Does that sound all right with everyone? Yeah, cool, awesome. All right, let's have a look at the question. Which subspecies is at Mareeba? This question's from Alan. Only the northern subspecies. We didn't find any southern. So the black rum ones, the more common ones there. Yeah. And then currently we have 60 participants. The new, oh, okay. Cool, so that's another question. This is from Gillian Carter. Guardians were also extensively trapped near Mareeba. That is correct. There isn't any Guardians left in Mareeba. In fact, pretty much east of the Great Dividing Range, they're all gone. Yeah, that was in the old days. Townsville, oh yeah, so if you want to go and see the southern subspecies near Townsville, please message me. I can direct you to some of the sites that are reliable, that without having to get into private properties. There are a couple of places, hopefully they're still around. Oh, the radio transmitters, this is a question from Helen. The radio transmitters weren't removed. The way we attached the radio transmitters was essentially to super glue it onto the feathers. Now, you know, birds moult. So as they moult, the radio transmitters just fall off. So that was a very, because it's really hard to trap the birds that already got a transmitter on. It's just too stressful for the birds. And generally speaking, within a couple of weeks, that transmitters just fell off. Yeah. We found a couple of the fallen off radio transmitters because the feathers, yeah, as the feathers grow out, we cut a little bit of the feathers on the back and then super glue the transmitters on. As the feathers grow back out, it simply just pushes the transmitters off the body. yeah, so it was really, really, yeah, I guess a technique that quite commonly used when you're attaching radio transmitters onto birds. Many injuries when caught in a mist net? No, surprisingly none in terms of the injuries for black-throated finches. With other birds, yes. With black-throats, because we had to, because it's an endangered species, in terms of the animal ethics and training, we had to do, you know, super, super carefully every single step. But when the times we were catching, I remember there was once we were trapping blackthroats, but instead of catching them, we caught, it was a super, super tiny water hole, probably about like 3 meters across, tiny, tiny water hole. We didn't see a massive flock of chestnut-breasted manakins flew in. We only set up one net. It was about 5 meters across, a single net. And that single flock of chestnut-breasted manakins, we had about 300 or 400 birds trapped in a single net. That was painful. That was really painful. So lucky we had 6 volunteers with us that day. It was so lucky. So we spent about half an hour removing every single bird. Literally remove, release, take it off the net and then let it go. Take it off of the net and let it go. So it was a very stressful morning. Luckily, we only had one injury. The injury happened to the leg. So the tarsus, usually when they're trapped in, sometimes they tangle in a way that could potentially had its leg broken. So that bird had to be euthanized on the spot. So in Australia, it's actually been quite lucky in terms of bird banding because the protocols are very strict. I remember a couple of years ago when I was working in Sweden, just ringing. I was bird banding. I was working a bird observatory for the summer and winter and spring and summer months, and we were just trapping birds every day. We were catching between 100 and 300 birds every single day for about 6 months. So we trapped thousands of birds, all the migratory species. We had quite a lot of injuries. Some of the injuries were not due to trapping the nets. Some of the injuries were simply because of the birds. You know, like us, some people might have really, really weak bones. Some of the birds, like, without even touching them, you can just, and also because you're trapping so many of them, you can see a lot of deformed growth of the, you know, the toes, the legs or the wings, the beak, all sorts of mutations, as you say, or different sort of deformities on the birds. This is quite interesting. Yeah. All right. Other questions? I think I have some hand. Oh yeah. There was an attempt to release Goodians from the Mariba wetlands. Oh yeah, that they do have Goodians at Mariba Wetland Reserve. They were captive birds. They basically bought them from aviaries. They were not fit to survive in the wild. They were releasing them, but they died within a week. Yeah, they were just simply not suitable to live in the wild. Yeah, I was there, and the people who were in charge of the reserve told me that none of them survived. Other mining ventures, I don't know. I don't think there is any sort of research project happening with black-throated finches in that region. I know there's another PhD project happening that involves black-throats, but more sort of general conservation, sort of community engagement sort of aspects. But yeah, cool. Any other questions? I haven't seen any.
Andre, you had your hand up.
No, I was just testing my screen.
Any other questions from anyone else? I'm curious, Stanley, if you had squatter pigeons in there.
No. Yeah, the nets that we use were only for small to medium-sized passerines. Larger birds, they tend to just bounce out.
I just meant on the site though.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, squatter pigeons. Yeah, I've seen quite a few of them on Adani. Yeah, because squatter pigeon has a much larger range, so they weren't really sort of a major sort of consideration when they're doing the management plans. But the key thing was the black-throats and ornamental snake and the Yunka skink. So those are the three key species they looked at. Yeah.
Any other questions from the floor? I think you've covered it.
If star finches intersect with mining areas, not that I know of, not on the East Coast. I don't know about Western Australia. It might be all Northern Territory. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Will be interesting to know that.
So what is the current state of play with Adani, Stanley?
With the current status of, sorry, I didn't.
The mine, like where is that at?
Oh, it's fully approved, so it's going ahead. And didn't they say earlier this year or a couple of months ago, they've just Adani has awarded the first sort of contract to build the rail project, like a few $100 million contract. I can't remember which company got it, but yeah, they're building the rail already. So yeah, it's really depressing. Yeah, especially with both federal and state government trying to push it through, and it's been dragging for so long. And they started in 2010, I think. That's when they first put in the application. 9 years. Yeah.
Wow.
Cool.
Okay, great. A virtual Hunter Bird Observers mug to you.
Thanks, mate.
We give a mug to our speakers, so I'll send one down. No problem.
No worries.
So yeah, thanks very much. A muted round of applause. Yeah, thank you. Greatly appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
If you have any questions, I'm sure Mick is happy. Well, I'm happy for Mick to share with everyone my email address. If anyone want to ask any questions, whatever, feel free.
Happy to do that. Yeah.
Awesome. Cheers.